Okay, well, Jim asked me to find something up above in the nursery, and I went through, and this procumbens juniper attracted my eye. I think if there's one lesson to be learned tonight, it's first of all, know your material. This one has quite a thick trunk, okay, and it's not all cascading downwards. An interesting part about procumbens is they are a very rampant juniper. They stay close to the ground. So it's very hard sometimes making bonsai out of them. The only thing you can do is either a little cascade or a shohin. Most of them don't have very thick trunks. Most of them don't have that much movement. They just come out of the ground and they fall. This one has something going for it. The trunk is very thick. It was probably a garden tree. It's very interesting. It has two trunks, and they're both completely diametrically opposed. I was thinking there was probably roots under one of the trunks, but there isn't. They're all joined here. So one trunk is going, I'll turn it around a bit, one trunk is going that way, the other is going the other way. It's very difficult to do a bonsai, to style a bonsai, if you have two trunks that are going in opposite directions. What we're looking for is harmony in a bonsai. We're looking for proportions. These two trunks are just about the same size and a bit boring. So what I'd like to propose to you tonight, also the second most important lesson is probably, Andy said, geez, I never saw that tree. When you're going through a nursery, just don't take the position that the tree is planted in for granted. Pick it up, move it around, and see what you can do with that tree. I looked at it, and I think there's some bean bags under here. Let me find something quite high. What I want to do is lift it up and work at it at this angle. All right, and I'll be using only the second trunk, this one here, and I'm going to cut the first one off, the one that's facing you here. Make a very interesting jin. You know, a lot of the old junipers in Japan, they only have one strip of living bark. All the rest is this deadwood. So it's the deadwood that catches the eye. It's not that the foliage just frames it, you know, is masked in back of it so that you can appreciate the beauty of the deadwood. So that's what I was thinking of doing with this tree. I'll just find a way of propping it up. We have a little, we'll take something, whoops, that looks new. Okay. I just want something high enough that I can put behind it. I have 3 wedges, but I want it higher still.
Jeff, you left it out.
Go get the dog. Go get the dog. Go get the dog. That's a start.
Yeah, what's over? Yeah, that might help. Okay,
That's not bad. I mean, mass combination of the two.
And this on the top. And I have some large wedges if you can pick them up there. What I usually do is I take a milk crate and pop them up in the milk crate. That really solidifies them, and I didn't think when I chose it of asking Jim for a milk crate.
Wasn't there one in the greenhouse?
That's true. I didn't think of going and getting it.
Are the lights on that we can see?
Where did you see it? In here or up top?
Up on top.
No,
we're okay for a while. Okay. So what I see in this tree is once it's lifted up, a very curving trunk. I will carve, not carve, but cut away some of the second part, this trunk here that's facing you. And then the trunk, the part I want to keep will be revealed. So I'm just going to get my Velcro pruners here and cut away part of it.
Okay, you can save that. Take it home, put it in rooting compound, and you can save it.
Rooting compound.
It might
No,
be.
it's, you can do small cutting, this long, but you can't.
Yeah, come on, you gotta let her really figure out. Come on, work with me here. Work with me here. If you keep it submerged in water for like a year.
That won't work.
I was so hoping it could. You know, anything's
You
possible.
can just buy me one.
Oh.
Okay, so now I'm going to scrape away the living bark here so that we can see this part here.
He's got
Okay.
the wow factor going already. Early into the pro.
Well, you know, there's a lot of trees that I looked at up there, and I'm thinking, geez, this could make a real sweet bonsai. But there wasn't the wow factor, and you really do, when you're working in front of an audience, you really do want to have some wow factor. You want to be able to say, oh, people to say, geez, I didn't expect that. So yeah, I must admit, I did. I was looking a bit for that. This one was actually wire. There's still wire sticking to it, this second trunk, so somebody tried to do something with it. Maybe it was in its previous life somebody's bonsai. God knows.
It was a trade-in.
There's wire, old copper wire on it. And,
Puller pliers. Still need the line on these pliers.
now, to create gins or shari, it's not very hard to do. You just squeeze if the bark, if the that part of the tree was still living, if there was still sap in it. It's best to do it right away, because otherwise it takes forever to scrape off the old bark once the branch is dry. So always, always, always do all your gins and sharis before starting to work on your tree, because inevitably you'll be using gins and sharis as anchoring points, and if you put wire around them, then you can't gin them and shari them. So that's unfortunate. We still can't see into the tree yet, can you? So it'll be a surprise. I'm just going to try to whiten some of this, getting off the old bark. Don't be afraid of removing a good part of the tree. Bonsai is really the art of paring down, reducing things to their essentials. It's very much in the Japanese culture to do that, to I'm blocking some of your views, I'm sorry. Right now I'm just stripping to, whether it be a Japanese garden, whether it be any type of Japanese aesthetics, what you're basically doing is just reducing things to their essentials, which is so important, that you want to see just what's really beautiful. If you can create a garden from one rock or one tree or one plant, all the more power to you. As you know, many Japanese gardens are just composed of merely of moss. And so this will be just be a few minutes here. This will be,
Did you just take the top bark off of it?
yes, and reveal the inner bark. Remove the bark and the cambium underneath, and that way the branch will be killed. We don't want it. It's superfluous to the design.
I'm gonna do that to your tree that I have.
you want to ask me a question? I'd be pleased to answer it.
For somebody that's just starting, would that be a good kind of tree to use?
Yeah, this used to be sold in all the, the shopping centers and bonsai stores as indoor bonsai, and it's not good indoor bonsai, but procumbens is probably one of the most forgiving shrubs for beginners. So it still is generally seen as bonsai, the perfect bonsai material. It's very easy to grow. It's very, it grows rapidly. The only thing is it takes forever to get a big, thick trunk. So you might, I always tell people that if you want a thick trunk bonsai, go and buy one with a thick trunk rather than waiting 10 or 15 or 20 years for it. Because that's often how much time it takes. And most of us don't have that much time to wait. So you can buy small ones for cuttings, but you must actually have to put them in the ground and wait 6 or 7 years if you want to get anything substantial. So go and buy them if you can find them. This one here, I don't know how much it cost, but it seemed reasonable when I chose it out of the nursery.
And how old would a tree like that be?
It's 320.
Yeah, it was 320.
It was 320?
Yeah, we're
How
taking-
old would it be? This one here, probably 10 or 15 years old. Okay. So I think it's, you have to figure that a tree generally costs about $50 a year to maintain in watering times and fertilizer. And in Montreal, of course, many of them, we have to overwinter them in a greenhouse because it's just too cold. A tree like this can be left outside in winter, but I try to bring many of even my conifers in a greenhouse that's very cool, but still it's above freezing, because it's the best time of year to work them. In winter is the only time of the year where it's calm, where you actually have the time. You're not spending your whole time watering, fertilizing, spraying with fungicides and insecticides. So it's the only time where you can just sit in the greenhouse all alone, put on some good music, and prune and wire your trees. So I think it's really, that's why I bring them. You can't work on a tree when it's frozen. It just doesn't work. The branches break. So winter is the ideal time also, because the sap retreats in the fall. In the winter, you've actually got, it's a good time to work on trees because there's less chance the branches will break. So if you can work on trees in winter, yeah, it's the ideal time. Try to do it. I don't know if here the temperature isn't as bad, so sometimes you can even leave them outside until December or January. The only thing is, if you bring them in to work on them, and it's in a warm area, try not to keep them inside too long, because more than a day or two they lose their dormancy, and then you're in big trouble once they lose their dormancy, because then you can't put them outside the rest of the winter. That you don't want. So this is a fun tree to work with, the procumbens, because they naturally, the reason why they were used so extensively as bonsai material was because they have such small foliage. Once they are pruned, they look like bonsai, instant bonsai. And that's what a lot of people wanted. When I was young, everyone wanted instant bonsai. You had to be able to make it and sell it within, a day. It was sad. It was pitiful. Stores were making, or dealers were making bonsai and selling them, and they just pulled them out of the pot stuck them in a bonsai pot, and sold them within a few days. So you can imagine how many died. Fortunately, I think most of those days are over. People have become more knowledgeable about bonsai, and you can't pull the wool over their eyes so easily anymore. I'm sure there's still places where it's done, but...
I was in the Philadelphia Flower Show one year, and we had a booth, very expensive booth. Anyways, we had storage space that we rented out, a store for restocking. And there was 3 people selling bonsai, and there was one guy who was an Asian gentleman, and he was in the stock room making trees. He was potting up, pruning and potting trees, and then somebody would come if they had a flagpole and take them out to the sales booth. So that's as instant as you can get.
Yeah. California, they have that along the roadsides. They have them every weekend.
Yeah, so just make them and
It's
offer them. Education.
Always, you know, when you're buying a tree, try to reassure yourself that that tree has been, that tree has literally been in a pot for at least 6 months, okay? It's hard. Sometimes, as I say, the dealers are unscrupulous. They won't tell you the truth. But usually you can just take the tree and move it a bit and see if it was recently repotted. And these real cheap fly-by-night outfits don't even tie them into the pot most of the time, so they'll just flop around. So try to avoid those. But if you're here, you probably, know where to buy them by now. It's unfortunate that a lot of the time it's the people that don't know anything that get the wool pulled over their eyes. That's unfortunate. Okay, now the gins, I'm going to reduce them and make them a little bit more interesting. I think that most people agonize too much over how to make gins. It's not very difficult. Just imagine a huge rock or tree falling on another tree, and then you can imagine what damage it'll do. And from there you can take your cue as to how to make gins and sharis. Peel back the bark to create beautiful gins and sharis. Juniper has wonderful wood to work. The old junipers, the branches can be so brittle. You really want to watch out for that. But you just go with the way the branch breaks and try to Jim, would you have a milk crate somewhere? It's slipping around, and I want to keep
in the
it.
greenhouse, Jim. I remember seeing it down there.
Yeah.
You get it? Jim, I gotta flush it.
In fact, I got a flash.
I brought my daughter's beanbag. Probably work.
She would have had something
Beanbag
to say
chair?
about that.
Yeah.
Didn't go anywhere. Sitting in
Now let's hop up just a second. There you go.
Trunk splitters, if you're working at all with old trees, trunk splitters come in very handy. You can break the branches in an interesting way, use them for pulling, and it really works out well. They come in different sizes. This is actually a smaller tree. Trunk splitters, I have some that are that long and this long and that long, and you can get smaller than this size. So even if you're doing shohin bonsai, the very small size, you can actually find a trunk splitter that will work for you. Okay, well, now I'm going to burn this all of the fiber off of this to make it more beautiful. We'll polish it, and then I'll start working on the foliage section. So I'll get a little blowtorch here.
Here.
Oh, there is one here. I had a piece of tile, and I guess
Okay, that's a backstop.
I guess it got left
In agreement.
up above. I just want something. Well,
My hand will work just.
yeah.
There's a wedge.
Well, I'll just try to hold the foliage away.
Use the capone.
Yeah,
Oh, I don't think
oh,
so.
too big.
Give it more character.
So what I'm doing now is I'm burning off the fiber that I created by pulling the grain of the wood, and it's going to make the tree look more aged. Also, by burning, it sets the, it heats up the resin, and the resin starts to boil, and when it hardens, it becomes very, very, very hard, and so it helps preserve the branch much longer. Okay, we'll get started with the wood burning.
Piece of tile for a backstop.
I left it up at the greenhouse, I
Piece of
guess.
tile for a deep backstop.
Oh, take off your shirt.
Okay, I'm willing to do that.
I'll get it out.
Okay, let's move the tripping material.
Don't worry if if it starts catching fire and burning. It generally creates a better looking gin afterwards if the end is all burnt. We brush off all the charred parts with a metal brush.
One time I had one of these and it was soaked in vodka.
Oh.
And it blew up. That was Woolwich. Harry Thomas.
Soaked in vodka.
Soaked in vodka. I was doing a burning demonstration and the whole town went on fire. Actually, it was a t-shirt.
Wow.
How's that?
That's not the case here, right?
He's looking at what he's doing. I did it a second time. I thought, why is water burning?
Right. That's a nice look.
I hope Harry passed away, and I hope he's at that big pub in the sky, because he certainly enjoyed
If
his
it exists, he'll find it.
booze.
Too bad she doesn't like it.
Yeah. She's really attached to you already.
Yeah.
You're gonna wonder what happened to that towel later.
She gets
Oh, okay.
It's her day.
Usually what I do is I use a bit of ceramic tile, or I'll use asbestos, a piece of asbestos sheet to protect the foliage from the heat.
We try to avoid asbestos down this way.
Not in the plumbing business. They sell them. They still sell them. Asbestos panels.
Yeah.
When it's soldering.
We're still shipping it to India now and China. It's awful. It all gets shipped there.
Wasn't that where we send most of our cigarettes these days?
Yeah.
Christmas. That's 90%.
We have a little one on return.
Well, asbestos, when it's added to cement, makes it much more flexible or something. So it is a good, they use it in water pipes, but it's not very good for humans, but it's cheaper, so they get away with it in India and China, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
Not yet.
Okay.
Although I can follow the torch, so
Okay. Oh,
maybe on the little mini ones.
okay. So
It won't be long. This is preparatory work for doing bonsai. Most people just launch into doing bonsai. There's a long period. You have to get all the dead wood ready. You have to brush the bark of junipers. So it's really quite a long period. And without that, you never get good final results. Okay, I'll stop here. We'll brush it. And it should look quite good. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Brush it, James. That way.
Is it important to brush it right away?
Well, if you want to put lime sulfur on it right away, it is. Is this one on? Yes, it is.
Sometimes we'll burn it after the lime sulfur is applied to it.
What does
Oh,
the
yeah.
making sulfur do?
Well, but not tonight.
It's too late now.
Lime sulfur is actually, it's a fungicide that's used on many fruiting trees, but not only does it preserve the wood, but also it whitens it. And what we want to do is reproduce the old trees in nature when they die. If they're like on the far north shore, if they're on a mountaintop where the air is very clean and pure, because conifers have resins in them, when they dry, they turn whitish color. If you've seen pictures of those old bristlecone pines
Yep.
in California, the trees sometimes have been dead for several thousands of years, but the old whitened trunks are still standing on those mountains. It's quite impressive. Sometimes the trees are living, but bare strands of living tissue, and all the rest is white. It's really quite impressive. So. What you want to do is brush hard, brush in line with the grain, and what it will do is the black will actually be removed on the outer sections and remain in the hollows. So you get a very interesting light and shadow effect. And when you put on the lime sulfur, it appears quite gray in certain parts, so it looks very aged. So that's interesting. Okay, so we've pretty well got that done. I don't think I'm going to lime sulfur it because we won't have time, but I assure you it will turn very white. So often demonstrators will just buy a sort of a driftwood gray acrylic paint. It's not very pretty because it doesn't show all the grain in the wood, but for immediate effect, they'll paint it all with driftwood gray, so it looks really old. Okay, now, if we turn the tree around like this is the part that's really beautiful. This dead wood and all of this that was living, that's come out of it. Now, what we do want to do is bring some foliage upwards to illustrate that. Now, we have some foliage here, but we do have a branch rising upwards in the background. So I'm going to start by pruning away some foliage so we can see into the tree. We are going to have some foliage at the back. We have a very large branch extending toward the front, and it's a very heavy branch, and it's hiding most of the front. We can use it, raise it up, but old junipers are very testy. They have very hard branches. So I think we can either raise it here, but it's not a very pretty branch, or we have one already up in the air there. So we're going to use the one up in the air. Now you're going to see something dramatic. A good lot of this foliage is going to fall by the wayside. Okay.
Pretty
Done.
So now we will actually create our tree. Now you can see the dead wood, can't you? And now I'm happy because I have less work to do. Okay. You said I'd have to drag this out till 9 o'clock?
Yeah, AM.
What?
AM, and then the
Oh, AM. Oh, Jesus. I'm going to have to work really hard.
But
Okay,
if you
I'm
want
going to...
sulfur, we'll all leave,
Right.
right?
Right. So what I'm going to do is cut away some of the dead foliage and cut back on some of these long branches, and then I'll wire and you'll be able to see the tree. I really think that we tend to keep too much foliage, and junipers are known for having very sparse, not too much foliage, a lot of dead wood. So what I want to do is expose all of that dead wood. Now, what do you think is going to happen to the trunk after I cut off that very heavy branch?
Some of it'll die.
Some of it's going to die back. There's a very heavy vein right here that's feeding all of this branch here. Now that heavy vein is all going to die. Do you think it's going to be tragic? No, because that'll create a wonderful line of sherry, all going down, deadwood, all down the front. Okay, and that is really exciting. That's what we want. We want to see all these strips of white and black. Well, white and brown, the dead wood and the living section. So there was already part of the trunk here that was completely dead. We'll cut it back. It's going downwards. It's not very interesting. And then break it a little bit more.
Yeah, this particular tree was in a collection actually in Canada.
In Canada?
Yeah, and then it went to Oregon, and then from Oregon it came here. And it's well over 20 years old. And this gentleman grew about 50 of these for 20-some years. And grew ill, and so this other person from Oregon purchased them. And then Walter saw them, so he bought them. Now they're here.
Well, they have a very interesting lifestyle. They've traveled more than some people. Well, you can tell the age of the tree. There's already dead sharis running up the trunk. So it's a very old tree, as Jim says, but that's what gives them character. I always believe that, you know, it's ironic. Humans, we don't like to age. We don't want to be all wrinkly and old looking, have dead parts to us. Well, I have
That's
a
generally
dead
negative, huh?
They have a pill for that.
Okay. But with trees, we're looking for that quality of age on our bonsai, and we find that so attractive. So it's sort of a little bit paradoxical that we're looking for age in the passage of time on trees, but not on humans. I always tell people I want my bonsai to look like Mother Teresa. Did you ever get a glimpse of her before she died? Boy, she was as wrinkly as a prune. I mean, she had, but every wrinkle was obviously, you know, attested to her strong courage and probably faith, I don't know, but she was really impressive. She had a look of age about her that was incredible, and strength. The more gins you can have on a juniper, I would say, the better it is. So do not hesitate to have as many gins as you can. The Japanese say junipers should look like dragons with fangs, with talons and claws everywhere. And they should be serpentine looking. They should be crawling above the ground. So you really do. I've got a helper here. Wasn't it W.C. Fields that when he did movies, they always put, there was a baby Elmo or something.
Right.
And apparently he hated that baby because the baby was a scene stealer. So when he was off set, he'd be kicking the baby, everything. He just hated babies. He was a grumpy old man, and he hated babies. Okay, so we've got that done. I'll just finish brushing the trunk a bit more, and then we'll get started on the wiring. Generally, I've seen demonstrations with Kimura, and he has his assistants that are there with little knives, picking up every little scale of bark and picking them off. Sometimes they'll work for hours getting his trees ready for a show. But even he, I believe, is sometimes insecure. I went to see him a few years ago, just after a big show in Takamatsu, and he kept saying, "What did you think of the tree I did? Did you like it?" And I'm thinking, who is he to ask me? You know, I mean, Jesus, you know, the guy is like revered throughout the world. And I told him it was Daiso Iwasaki just before he died that had let him choose this juniper that he actually had in the ground, and the juniper itself was just incredible. So I said it sent out a feeling of peace. It was really a wonderful tree, but the way he had arranged all the branches, it was very, very serene looking. And that's what I told him, and a big smile lit up his face. And he says, "Oh, that's the feeling that I wanted people to get." So then he spent the rest of the afternoon talking to me, because sometimes he can be very curt. But I think if you give them the right answers that they're looking for, then they really like you. So, yeah. It was really quite something. So, did any of you ever get his books? He put out like 3 books on his work, and volumes 1, 2, and 3. Volume 1 is very difficult to get. Even in Japan, they pay big money. They're like magazines. But I got the whole set and had them bound, and we refer to them quite often. Yeah, Jim's pulling out. That's what, 2 or 3?
2.
2. Let them be your Bible. If you really want to, I mean, some of them were translated by Bonsai Today magazine. But the transformations he did with those trees is just amazing. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Sapporo.
He used the red one. The red ones are the best.
The best. So,
The best.
Wow.
yeah. The guy is amazing. He's 72 or 73 now. He won't travel anymore. I've been tried to get him to come to Montreal. I said, we'll give you the best trees in Montreal if you'll come. And he says, no, I am too old to travel. But I think the real reason why, his wife died when I was over there about 6 years ago. And his wife looked after him and made all the arrangements, and she was the real outgoing one. And after that, he became a little bit of a loner. He has 2 daughters, and they look after him too. But he refused to travel after that, oddly enough. So he is 70. He's 73 years old now. So I think he's made all of his, anything he had to do, he did. So he doesn't have to prove himself anymore. Okay, so now we've got the tree polished. We've got the dead wood. Now we're going to reduce some of the foliage. We just want you to really basically admire that beautiful dead wood, okay? And the rest, the foliage is just going to frame it. So this is the front right here where we can see this dead wood. So the branch up here, we're just going to put some branches on the side and arrange it so that you can see it on each side. It would be wonderful if, I have a friend who's a chocolate maker, and he was an excellent chocolate maker, but he started opening all these stores, and now he spends all of his time just running his stores. He has about 50 or 60 employees, so all he does is run the stores. He doesn't make chocolate anymore. He sort of gets other employees to do it. And often in bonsai, it's the same way. Many bonsai artists never seem to get time to work on their trees because you're always running around working on somebody else's trees or doing demos or running off or running a business. So it's very difficult at times to really find the time to just sit down and work on a tree. And that's the most pleasurable experience. I tell everybody, and it might not be proper to say it, but creating a bonsai is like the act of making love. It's just wonderful, but it lasts a very short period, and you create this tree and this orgasm of wonderful feeling, and the tree comes out, but then afterwards you're stuck with the results, raising it for the next 30 or 40 years like a child. So it's a very, the act of creating a bonsai is very short and very exciting. But you can't be creating new bonsai every day. If you can create 10 bonsai a year, figure that in 10 years you're going to have 100, and you have to look after them every day. And people say to me, "Oh, it's really easy because the older they get, the easier it is to look after them." No, siree. The older the tree gets, the more ramified it gets. So every year you're wiring hundreds or sometimes thousands of little branches. I have a 5-trunk Scots pine, and one of my students used to come every Friday and work on that, and he started in November and finished in March. So, and he worked quite well and quickly. So it just goes to show you how much time it takes to work on refined trees, on old trees. It's just such a long, long period of time. So you really do have to take all that into consideration when you're doing bonsai. Don't do too many. Do good ones. Create really interesting trees, and but don't create too many, please. It just takes too much time to look after all of them. Now, I'm sure, Jim, how long has this been sitting in your nursery?
3 years.
3 years, okay. So, people will kick themselves sometimes for going by good material. Just look at it all and imagine it. I got a tree, I did a tree for a demo in Vermont a few years ago, and apparently it had been there for years and years and no one looked at it. And after I created it as a bonsai, the owner received hundreds of offers to sell it. But it had been there in his nursery. It had just been, you know, people just walked by it. So it goes to show you that really you should be looking at plants very, very closely to see what you can do with them. You should get all the pruning back. We don't want to wire to the tips of everyone for nothing. So you cut it all back before you start wiring so that you have less work to do, obviously. Any questions up to now?
This tree backwood a lot.
Yes. Once it's opened up to the light, they backbud extremely well. That's the wonderful thing about procumbens, is they really do extremely well. So it will. It's so easy to work with them, I find. I have some ones that I bought at various nurseries, and I'm always amazed at how much they get very strong on the top, though. It's odd because they are ground budding, but they get very, very strong near the top, and so you're pruning back very often up at the apex of the tree. So now I'm going to start wiring some of these branches down, and here's where the layering of branches will really come into play. We'll be air layering them to fill in all the empty spaces. Okay. It's a good thing to clean up the bark and get all the old scaly bark off, because they breathe better. The trees actually love it when all the old outer layer of bark is removed. Now, that said, it doesn't mean that you should do it to all junipers. I have many, many junipers where I want them to look real old and gnarly, so I don't remove all of the old bark. But others, the more deadwood you have, the more whitened sections, the prettier it is if you have that contrast between the old dead bark and the white, so the very red bark. So you'd often you polish the reddish colored bark and put a little bit of oil. You can put olive oil, vegetable oil, camellia oil, anything in the way of oil, and it reddens up and looks very, very dramatic and very beautiful. So, yes, that's another option. Okay, so we're going to start with the wiring. Okay. Now, as you've noticed, up until now, I haven't even selected an apex. Apexes are not the most difficult thing to create in bonsai. You can raise up anything to be a new top to your tree. So I think I'll be going with something in this section here. Oh, great. It's so tall. We're going to lower it this much. Watch your ears. Okay, that's better. You should always work at an ergonomic level. Try to have the tray below your hands. Otherwise, you just get too tired if you're doing it all day. Don't forget, many bonsai people don't do it all day, but in Japan they do, and you get too exhausted. So. Just a little bit of 12 to start with. Just got some wire wrapped around here. Here's one. Oh, good. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So much easier when it's.
She wants to know why you're wiring it.
Oh, why am I wiring it? Because I'm a sadist, and I like torturing trees. Because a bonsai person is never happy with the shape, and so by wiring it, it's like putting braces on your teeth. Okay, often we have crooked teeth and we want to straighten them out, so we'll put braces are basically wires. Nowadays they use plastic too, and you apply them to the teeth and straighten them out, and after a couple of years you can remove them, and the teeth will keep that position. The same thing with the branches. We put wire onto the branches and bend them.
So that they have the twists and all that stuff.
Oh, well, sometimes you want to straighten them out. You don't always want to twist them. But at least what we do is we put wires on, and after we've bent them, they'll keep that position after a year or two, all right? So it's very important that we do put wires on the tree. It didn't used to be always wiring. The Japanese only invented the idea of wiring trees in the 1900s, because originally the trees were all collected in nature. They were wild trees, and so they already had beautiful wild shapes that the Japanese appreciated, and then they would just shape them by pruning the branches a bit or pulling them down with cords or weights.
Right.
And that way they could shape the tree. But then what happened was, in about 1873, after Admiral Perry entered Japan, and Japan was democratized, it became a democratic society, people were very interested in Western, anything Occidental. They started abandoning their culture. So the Japanese government started promoting traditional arts. So they named Japan, among other arts, sort of a national art in Japan, a traditional, one of the 7 traditional arts. So what happened was it encouraged many people to start growing bonsai, but there weren't enough trees to supply the demand. So they started recreating wild trees, but by growing them in the ground. And to make them look all gnarly and crooked and everything, they'd wire them first and then plant them in the ground. So it's all relatively recent. Before that, they were not doing that. People like Kimura often used to have their apprentices wiring all day long. Kimura was a known alcoholic. He used to go out every morning to the bars and not come home until 5 or 6 o'clock at night. And his apprentices would wire all day. And he'd come home half soused. he was like a drunk. He'd come home but all he would do when he came home is he would sit in front of the trees, and all of a sudden start going with and every tree would turn out to be absolutely incredibly lovely. I mean, even in a drunken state, he was a far better bonsaiist than probably anyone else will ever be. So, you know, he didn't tell his students how to do it. He just said wire them, and would come home and place all the foliage beautifully. There were some years when he would have 17 or 20 trees in the kokofuten were all wired by him. And that's an amazing feat if you know how much time it takes to get a tree ready for the kokofuten, which is the big show in Japan. You can make a bonsai out of anything. It doesn't mean it's always ideal and pleasing, but you can do it pretty well, make a bonsai out of anything.
Boston ivy, geranium.
Poison ivy.
Yeah. That's the
Nick
most
Lenz
fun.
did it with poison ivy.
That wouldn't be my choice.
What would get ready?
Poison ivy.
That's what he'd say. That's what he'd say.
I told Jeff I like that one, I want it.
Well, speak to the boss.
That's right.
The boss is
Speaks
right
to
over
the
there.
boss. You'll either
I
bribe
won't even
him.
have to do nothing because you've already done it all.
Oh, no.
For today.
Hey, a week from now, you're going to go, oh no.
So you can like bend them any way you want them to go, Nursery?
Yes.
What about shapes?
Shapes?
Yeah, like a heart and stuff like that. Can you bend them like that?
I guess I could, but you see, in bonsai, we want to make them look natural, and trees don't naturally grow like hearts. So the Chinese used to do a lot of bonsai with anthropomorphic figures, like octopi or elephants or stuff like that, but not the Japanese. The Japanese are horrified by that. So yeah, I guess you could make the shapes if you wanted to, but you actually, if you were classically trained Japanese, you would not want to do that, all right?
Okay.
They would cut your thumbs off probably if you tried to do it. But they do topiaries are a good word used for animal-shaped plants.
I don't want to do animals.
No animal, it's just hard.
I want to do like dragons and stuff like that.
Well,
Dragons. I guess you could. Okay, we're getting there with the wiring.
No, it's just south of Longwood Gardens off of US 1. Something like that, that's Tokyo.
Yeah, I'm good at drawing and stuff, so.
When we're creating these junipers, we pull out the foliage inside to let the light in, and then they'll bud out strongly all along the branch. So when you're looking after your junipers, you have to get in there with scissors and remove a lot of the inside branching to let light through. Otherwise, all the insides of these junipers will go and die on you.
Do you bring the end of your wires back, or do you leave them stick out, or how do you handle the end of your
I
wires?
just cut them. I try not to bring them back. I just cut them. I do a half turn and cut them, but I don't do a full U-turn. No, not a full U-turn.
What's the purpose of that? You
Keep it
Well,
from falling out when you
yeah.
style it.
That's it.
You can put the buds up on the pines at the end, at the tip, which can kind of make a reach for that.
I guess I'm misunderstanding. I thought you meant like pulling the wire back towards the back of the branch.
Yeah, I don't.
What's the purpose for that? I've never heard of that.
Because sometimes it'll slip out of the wire when you're bending it dramatically, and then you can't shape the end of the branch. So a lot of people do that. I don't like to do that, because if it's very difficult subsequently to unwire the tree. And so you don't want that.
Yeah, we had wiring challenges all day.
Yes. Now some of you are going to have to come up and see whether I wired properly after the demo. I'm getting through this wiring bit.
Well, after a while, you just cross-eyed looking at these branches.
I'm fine, I'm missing this. I got Zoom.
A little bit.
Mind blocks everything.
I have a different type of wire caddy. It's from Japan, and it's like a box, and they're all set on rolls, and there's a little guide, and you pull, and so that works out really well because they never get tangled up. I like it more than this, but they charge a good bit of money for them. They're about $500, and then you have to ship them home. So they don't give them away, but boy, they have two types. The ones for the copper, you can spool the copper onto a roll and then just slide it into the slot. And the caddy for aluminum, you just push it in, and there's like cushions, and it just fits in there, and it's just wonderful. Just wonderful. It saves so much time, effort, and everything else.
See, probably for those of us with 10 or 20 trees, it wouldn't.
Yeah.
But for you,
Yeah, it's wonderful to have your wire not all tangled up. No, I will not be doing a heart shape tonight, I'm sorry. In Japan, they hate to waste wire, so they have signs everywhere in the nursery saying something like haste makes waste, and do not waste any wire. And even if you have a little piece like this, they chastise you for wasting wire.
they would have been unhappy with us.
Oh, geez, they would have
Big bucket,
killed
right?
some of these people today. So, yeah. Yeah. Because copper wire is very expensive, and they think it's like taking food out of the mouth of a baby. If you waste too much wire, then you're costing the owner of the nursery too much money, and they really don't like that at all. So they'll.
Why did you choose a copper over aluminum?
Because I'm going to be doing some major bending,
Bending?
and the copper is a harder wire. It holds better, so it's going to give me more control over how I want to place the branches.
Is the switch to aluminum really because of the grade?
No, it's because for tender bark trees in Japan, what they would traditionally do is they would cut a strip of paper into thin strips, and then, do we have any paper around? I have some drawing sheets over here. It's a bit thick, but I'll show you what they would do. They would they'd get big sheets and fold it and fold it and fold it again, and then they would get long strips about this wide. They would get a long strip of paper, and if they were wiring a thin stripped tree, a thin trunk tree like a camellia or a Japanese maple, or something where copper wire really damages the bark, they would protect the bark by wrapping the wire. You would hold the wire, okay, and you would do this. And you could actually buy it. This paper is a bit hard, but you could buy the coating paper also in Japan, and you could just twist it. You twisted generally the wire, the paper around the wire, and then you would put wire that was coated with paper like that around the tree. This paper will not work, it's too heavy. But you would actually do that, and that would protect the bark. And so when the aluminum wire came along, and it's much softer, it was like a godsend to them. It saved them so much work wrapping all the wire with paper. So that's why they started using aluminum for soft bark trees. So anything, most deciduous trees are done with aluminum, and most of the conifers are still done with copper, because copper holds so much better. So it's certainly more convenient to use copper than aluminum for the conifers. You know, the Japanese say that it's quite ironic that the conifers are more flexible, and yet they're wired with the harder wire, and the deciduous trees are hardwoods, and they're very inflexible, and they're wired with soft wire. So there's a real paradox there. But they say it's because usually, you know, if it's a hardwood tree, a deciduous tree, you can't bend big branches or the trunk. It'll just break. So they usually shape their hardwood trees when they're young. They'll shape the trunk, and they'll shape the main branches. And then all the rest of the tree is mainly just done through pruning, or just the tips are done with fine wiring. So it's even in Japan, most experts usually concentrate either on conifers or on deciduous trees. There's a famous bonsai artist called Hiroshi Takayama. He was the president of the Nippon Bonsai Association, and his nursery is known uniquely for deciduous trees. So some people will specialize in deciduous, others will specialize in conifers.
How loose do you do the wiring?
Excuse me?
How tight or how loose do you do the wiring?
Neither nor. What you do is you're holding the wire against the branch, so there's no space, and yet you're not putting it on very tight, but it's not loose enough that you can see any light, any space between the wire and the branch. It has to be sitting on the branch, because when you go to bend it, if it's not on the branch will break. So it has to be quite, it's a good question, because really it has to be quite tight, but not too tight, okay? So I think that, yeah, that's a very good question. Most people are not doing it very well. It's unfortunate, they don't wire very well. And you have to wire all the primary branches. All the primary branches first, all the ones coming off the trunk. Now I'm starting on the secondaries.
Our follow-up question would then be, how long will the wire stay on?
Okay. Well, the Japanese say that generally deciduous trees, it's 2 to 6 months. And conifers, it's 2 to 18 months. That's general rule, okay? Some of them, if it's a very large branch, will even stay on longer for a conifer. So it all depends on how old the tree is and how much you fertilize it too. Because obviously, if you put a tree in full sun and fertilize it well, what's going to happen? It's going to grow more vigorously, and it's not the wire that grows into the tree, it's the tree that grows into the wire. So if the tree is growing very rapidly, then the tree will grow in faster into the wire. Also, different sections of the tree grow at different rates, different rhythms. The top is, most trees are apically dominant, so the sap goes upwards. So the top branches are usually very, very, very vigorous because they're getting more light, they're getting more sap, and the lower ones are weak. So you usually have to start by removing the wire off the top of the tree and the branch tips where there's more light, where there's more auxins, more hormones going to those ends. The inside branches or lower branches, those are usually the last you wire. I was telling somebody today, I don't usually unwire all my trees. I just don't have the time because we spend the whole winter wiring, and by the end of the winter there must be, you know, a few 100 pounds of wire when it's removed. So what I actually do is I get my students to do the wiring, the unwiring, and I put flags. When I'm watering in the morning, if I see the wire starting to sink in the tree, I'll put these rainbird irrigation flags. So if it's an orange flag, it means unwire it. If it's a blue flag, usually it means to repot. If it's yellow, it means the tree has some sagina, some weeds in it, so it has to be removed. If it's white, the lime sulfur has to be replaced. If it's green, just wash the trunk. So there's all these flags because I'm not always home, and the students will come over and they want to know what to do. So those are the clues as to what to do. So, yeah. But I warn them that when they start unwiring, if I'm not around, if the wire, not to unwire the whole tree, it's very rare that the whole tree is unwired at one time. Often only maybe just at one or two branches. Sometimes just to loosen the wire, they'll go and cut it where it's sinking in, just in a few places. And they'll come back to it a week later and do another part and another part until the whole tree's unwired. But the unwiring process might take close to sometimes, might take a whole year to get the whole tree unwired. We've only got 3 other small branches to wire, and then I'll begin by placing the branches. As you see, I'm trying to get everything wired so that I can place them as I want.
Is it true that a cherry does not like to be wired with, that there's something in copper that's detrimental to a cherry tree? I don't know.
Yeah,
I've
they
heard
say
that.
that.
I don't know if
It's been written in 1 or 2 Japanese books, but I couldn't tell you. I might have 1 cherry tree, and I've never noticed that. There's a lot of superstitions and rumors. Like there's an old one about ginkgos. Never repot a ginkgo, and yet I think they do need repotting quite often. There's a lot of rumors. I just don't know. I'd say just do it. And if you see it's reacting badly, well, then you can cut it off. But there is that rumor there. Yes. The old traditionalist Japanese. But maybe that was because of copper, so you could just use aluminum. You know, I find that way too many people are reading too many books, and they're saying, oh, I can't do this and I can't do that. And I'll tell them, well, just try it. Rather than stop reading books, stop going on the internet, and just get to work and do bonsai. I'm always telling them that. Too many people will say, well, you know, so-and-so says this, so-and-so says that. And I go, I tell them, just forget what so-and-so says and just do bonsai. So it's very important that you just get to work and wire and get the experience. I'm trying to find the end, maybe over here. That's what I don't like.
until that tree gets repotted.
Yep.
Would you want to grow it in that position?
Not necessarily. No, it can grow anyway. I would water it less though, obviously, because now I've just removed more than half of, about 60% of all its foliage. So it's going to take a lot less water. So that's the problem with most people, is that they just, once they've pruned a tree, they'll go and keep on wiring it in the same manner, and then say, oh, you know, David did my bonsai and killed it because now, you know, he worked on it and it died. Yeah, well, usually it's the aftercare when it dies, because they haven't watered it properly. They kept watering it the same way. So you always have to be careful about what you do after the tree is wired and placed. So yeah. But I don't usually, sometimes if I'm trying to reduce the root ball of a collected tree, I'll remove the soil on one side and put a board and try to make the root ball smaller. But this would be a bit dangerous. I do believe there's some roots here. When I'm repotting it, I would take the roots and I would bend them downwards into the pot. So that's what I would do with that.
How long would you wait to repot that tree? Next year?
Well, I generally tend to repot in the summer. This is not a good time because afterwards you're putting them outside, and obviously what's going to happen is it's going to turn cold pretty soon. The roots won't have a time to grow new roots and harden off before the winter comes. So you're really putting the life of the tree in peril by repotting it at this time of year. So how long? I would repot it. Junipers, there's two types of bonsai. There's bonsai with continuous growth. They'll grow pretty well all spring and summer. And there's determined growth, that it has one growth flush and it stops. Okay, so ginkgos have one growth flush, pines one growth flush, spruces one growth flush. Junipers are in the cypress family. Thuyas, junipers, false cypresses. They're sending out new roots and new shoots from March right through until June. So you can repot pretty well any time, all during that time. So it all depends. You have to learn how your trees are, whether they have continuous growth or just predetermined growth, one growth period. And then after that, you can really decide when you're going to repot them. You always start with the trees that are very difficult to repot. The pines, for example, you have to get them really early in the growing season. It's primordial that you get them very, very quickly. Otherwise, they're just going to die on you if you repot them too late.
She needs a clue.
Yes.
The candle on the pine starts to elongate. You have to give her some clues here.
Okay, yeah.
The growth of a pine is a candle that emerges.
That's right.
And that's kind of our clue that it's waking up.
No, you should have repotted way
before there's even any activity.
Oh, yes.
I've been killing trees for years now. All right, I've been scolded. So you're saying even before the candle is done anything?
Oh, yeah.
But what happens if it's still really cold, or you feel it's going to be too cold?
When you feel, well, got a
it's
dilemma.
going to be below freezing, or if...
Then you'd bring it in during the night, just for that night, and bring it back out during the day, because
so you got to keep back and forth.
Yeah.
All right. That's how I feel a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I thought you'd want the candle to at least show you that it's now waking up.
No, often by then it's too late.
Okay.
Larch, even if the candle is starting to fatten and isn't opened up completely, it's pretty well too late, and that's in the pine family. So you really have to observe your trees very closely and know, in Japan they know exactly what day they can start repotting their black pines or their white pines. It's all very, very, very predetermined for them. For many years here in the States you've enjoyed warming and you haven't been prepared, and you get a normal winter, and that's what happens. Trees die. I think you should always be be prepared for the worst, because it can happen, and it's so much cheaper to, you know, just be prepared for, you know, put your trees on the ground, mulch them in, put a snow fence around them or something. You know, you have to be prepared for all eventualities. You really have to be. And it's unfortunate if you lose trees after you've spent so much time growing them. I think that's horrid that they should all die.
The other danger, like with trees outdoors, is ice and snow and ice and snow and ice and snow, and all of a sudden you break off something that you want to cry about. Even if it's in the ground, the tree, you know, it's not the root system, it's not the tree per se, but it's the ice and snow that now...
Yeah, but you know what I do, I have growing benches, and there are rows and rows and rows of them, and I'll put all the trees on the ground, and then I'll cover the tops of the growing benches with sheets of plywood, and then I'll cover them with old plastics from my greenhouse. There's like opaque plastic,
right.
And the old plastic, there's a clear one inside and an opaque one outside, and then I hold them all down with cement blocks, and they all come through the winter without having any broken branches. And also, because they're under this opaque plastic, it doesn't get too warm. So even during thaws, they don't warm up. And usually there's snow or ice on the top. And then by the time mid-March comes along, and the days, if there's a day above zero, I'll roll up the plastic a little bit. And I've never lost a tree. So I don't take any precautions, because I really do believe that most people are too cavalier about protecting their trees for the winter.
When you say a day above zero, you do mean Celsius, correct?
Oh yes.
Just
sorry,
making sure.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes, I'm thinking in
March it's still
terms.
zero?
You know, Americans are the only nation on the face of the earth that are still using Fahrenheit. I'm sorry. Yeah, I
And
forgot
inches
about it.
too.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
And inches too.
Yes, yes,
There's three of us. There's 3 countries in the world.
which countries?
It's Myanmar and another country in Africa. But only in the United States, the only ones that are on Celsius and on meter. They're not on meters.
Right.
Not on Celsius and not on meter.
Really?
Yep.
3 holdouts.
Yeah.
3 dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Carter tried.
Yeah. Well, you know,
Tried for 5
Yeah,
years.
Carter tried. He tried.
Americans are very pig-headed sometimes. Look at, you know, we don't use pennies anymore. They abolished them.
Right.
No problem. They,
Well, we're one of the few countries too that has a paper dollar.
yeah,
Yeah.
dollars aren't worth that much anymore,
Yeah.
so the government stopped making them and put out coins.
Coins.
And then $2 bills are not worth anything, so they
Another
abolished
thing they
those and
tried
put
and
out $2 bills. And then a few years ago, they said, hey, that old paper money wears out too
Right.
quickly, so we'll give you plastic money. So all our money is made of plastic. Yeah, plastic. So we adapt very quickly. We accepted gay marriages like 20 years ago. It didn't have to go to Supreme Court and people going nuts. Everybody just said, okay, that's what people want. But Americans are very slow to adapt. Maybe it's because it's such a big country. I don't know why. But anyway, it's up to you. It's up to you. But it's surprising that, you know, the way it's happened here, that everyone is so slow to adapt to those changes. Yep, so we don't use pennies anymore. In fact, to get rid of them, we go and collect our old pennies if we find them and spend them in the States. They want our pennies. So,
The coin counting machines don't want your pennies.
oh no?
Oh no, they won't go through.
They won't?
Nope.
Oh really? I didn't know that.
Even though they're actually worth more, because Canadian dollar is worth more than the American dollar, I believe.
Not anymore.
No?
Not anymore. No, it's gone. It's gone down lately. Just lately it's gone down. It was worth, our dollar was worth a little bit more until a little while ago, and we dropped. So, unfortunately.
David, when do you dig or transplant large?
Oh, when we go to collect larch, we collect them very far north of Montreal. So where we go collecting them is already snow covered. We have to go by the last week in September. You have to go collect them.
You collect in the fall.
In the fall,
Oh.
because in the spring, where we collect them on the tundra, it's still frozen even in June. We've tried a few times, and it's been horrible because it snows all night. You get there, they're all frozen in, so you really can't collect them at that time of year. So you have to go when the ground is still unfrozen, which is the fall, all right? And in the fall, you have to wait until the trees are yellowing. Once they're completely yellow, then you can go and collect them. That means generally about the last week in September and the first in October. After that, snow sets in up there. Usually when we go collecting, it's already very cold. At night it freezes over, but just maybe a quarter of an inch. And then by the morning when we start digging, it's already, that upper layer has unthawed. But the ground crunches when you're collecting, the end of September, beginning of October. In spring you can't collect because it's so frozen up there, you just can't do it. Now, you can repot them. Once they're back south, then we repot early in the spring. I overwinter mine either outdoors. I just put a snow fence around them so snow will collect. And as soon as they unthaw, which is about between the 15th and the 23rd of April, the buds are already fat. So they're the very first trees I repot outside before the buds open, before you see any sign of green at all. Because
so when the buds are getting that golden color?
Before that. Even.
Before that?
Yeah. Just when they're starting to plump up and glisten a bit. They're not even gold, they're just glistening. Okay. And that's when I repot them. And I don't lose them at that time.
So in our area then here, would that be a good time to also collect them?
Yeah, you collect them very, very early in the spring, very early.
Okay.
And I couldn't tell you what time of year it would be, but if they're budding out in mid-April here, it'd probably be mid-March where you are.
See, now I've always waited till they've turned chartreuse before I've dug or transplanted.
Really?
And I've never had a problem.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Maybe our trees are, because they're coming from such far north country, maybe they're more time sensitive, you know. It takes them a few years to adapt to growing in the south. Growing, for them it's like being transported to Florida. They just go crazy because they grow so quickly. We have to watch out about them getting large needles and everything, because it's just, if you over-fertilize them or give them too much water, they just go nuts. They grow too rapidly. So we have to be very, very careful. But I've seen many, many people kill larch because they're transplanting them too late in the season. So do it as early as you can. But the only thing is, never let them freeze after they're transplanted. And never keep them inside during the winter in any sort of structure at all. Never keep them in a cold frame or well, maybe a cold frame, but never in a greenhouse, never in a garage, never in a garden shed. Never, 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 never.
And why is that?
Because they're not completely dormant. If the temperature is above freezing, they keep on growing. And then if you put them outside in the spring and there's any frost at all, then they just, first of all, they'll bud out very early. They'll bud out in, they'll bud out in in February in a greenhouse. And then after that, if you keep them in the greenhouse, there's not enough light. They need very bright light. So the needles are all yellow. And they never grow very well. You can't adapt those yellow needles to outside. I've tried months at a time. I put them under a shade cloth and during the day and put them out toward the evening to get just a tiny bit of sun, but it never seems to do the trick. It takes months and months and months. Otherwise, you just kill them if you keep them indoors. So it's not a good idea to try to keep larch tamarack indoors during the winter.